Keanu Reeves was heading to his car after a small indie screening until he saw a man sleeping in a rusted vehicle nearby. When he looked closer, his heart stopped. It was the stunt double who once saved his life on set, now homeless and broken. What Keanu did next, no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the parking lot behind the indie theater slick and shimmering beneath streetlights. Keanu Reeves had just wrapped up a modest Q&A for a small charity documentary, a passion project he'd quietly backed for a filmmaker friend. There were no paparazzi tonight, no red carpet, just folding chairs, dim lights, and a room full of hopeful creatives. He liked nights like this. Quiet, simple, human. He adjusted his black hoodie and walked to the back of the venue where his car was parked. Out of sight, just how he preferred it. He passed rows of older sedans and compact cars, water beating across their hoods, exhaust still curling faintly from one or two that hadn't yet cooled down. That's when he saw it. At first it was just a flicker, a subtle shift in the shadows inside one of the cars near the far end of the lot. Nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe someone waiting for a friend, maybe someone sleeping off a drink. But something about the stillness made him pause. Keanu stopped, half turning his head. The car was older, a battered red Toyota with a dented rear bumper and one mismatched door panel. Its windows were fogged slightly from the inside. There was a blanket, or maybe a sleeping bag, pressed up against the passenger's side glass. As he walked past slowly, trying not to stare, a small movement caught his eye. A hand adjusting the edge of the blanket. A faint sigh. And then the face. Weathered, graying, hollow-cheeked but unmistakably strong beneath the surface. A scar cut across the man's left brow, thin and pale like an old memory. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was heavy, labored, the kind of breathing that came with pain. Keanu froze. He stared at the man through the street window, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest for reasons he couldn't name. That face. He knew that face. It couldn't be. But it was. Mike Torres. His stunt double. His partner. The man who had jumped from moving cars, taken falls off rooftops, and once tackled a fire escape collapse in freezing rain just so Keanu wouldn't have to. The man who had risked everything on the early films that built Keanu's name into something more than just a role. Mike Torres, now asleep in the backseat of a rusting Toyota. Keanu's breath caught. He stepped back instinctively, as if his eyes had played a trick. The name Mike Torres echoed through his memory like a song he hadn't heard in years, but still remembered every lyric. Could it really be him? Mike had been more than a stunt double. He'd been a protector, a quiet older brother figure during the chaos of those early sets, when Keanu was still learning how to navigate Hollywood. Before the fame, before the pressure, Mike had been the one who stayed late on set, who rehearsed moves over and over to make sure Keanu never had to. He was the one who laughed with the crew, who took bruises with silence, and who always walked away from falls even when they looked impossible. Until he didn't. Until that one fall during a high-stakes rooftop jump. Keanu remembered it like it happened yesterday. Mike landed wrong, shattered 2 ribs, and blew out his shoulder. He finished the scene anyway. Got up, nodded, and limped off camera. It was the last time Keanu ever saw him on a set. And now here he was, sleeping in the back of a car, scarred, gray, forgotten. Keanu didn't move closer. He couldn't. His hands clenched in the pockets of his jacket, heart tangled between disbelief and guilt. He wanted to knock on the window, to wake him, to say something, anything. But what do you say to a man who once put his body on the line for you, and who now slept in silence, parked beside dumpsters and cracked pavement? Keanu looked around. The lot was nearly empty. No one else noticed. He glanced back once more. Mike stirred slightly, but didn't wake. His face remained peaceful, worn, hollowed by time. Keanu turned and walked away, not because he didn't care, but because the weight in his chest was too much to carry in that moment. He reached his car, but didn't unlock it. He just stood there, rain from the roof dripping onto his sleeve, his breath clouding in the air. Questions came rushing in. What happened to him? Where had he gone? Why didn't anyone say anything? Why didn't I look for him sooner? It wasn't until Keanu was halfway home, hands gripping the steering wheel, that he realized something he couldn't ignore. He had walked away from a man who had once refused to walk away from him. That night, sleep didn't come easy, because even though the car was miles behind him, the memory stayed parked in his mind. Keanu sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, a glass of untouched water in front of him, staring through the open balcony door. The city was asleep, but his mind wasn't. Images kept looping through his head like scenes from a film he couldn't pause. Mike falling from that scaffold, Mike laughing between takes, Mike lying in the back of that car. He hadn't even been sure it was him at first, but the scar above the brow, the same one he got doing that motorcycle slide in Rage Point, confirmed it. And the jawline, the eyes, even closed, still had the heaviness of someone who'd seen more than most. Keanu had known stuntmen to come and go. It was the nature of the job, physical, punishing, and often thankless. But Mike had been different. He had been family, even if unspoken. And now he was living out of a car behind a theater while the world rolled on without him. The guilt gnawed deeper. Keanu had built a life off moments men like Mike made look effortless. But no one ever remembered the names in the shadows. No one knew that every hit, every fall, every spectacular explosion was someone's real body, someone's real cost. And for Mike, the cost had clearly come due. He pulled out his phone and typed in Mike's name. No social media, no recent credits, no contact. Just old IMDb listings and a stunt coordinator blog that hadn't been updated since 2010. Keanu clicked through photo after photo, but they only deepened the ache. Behind-the-scenes shots of grins, bruises, and adrenaline-soaked gear. Mike, arms crossed. Mike laughing in the background. Mike with a busted lip and a thumbs up. The kind of man you didn't notice until he was gone. Keanu leaned back in his chair, ran a hand through his hair, and whispered to no one in particular, "How did we all just let this happen?" He wasn't sure what to do yet, but he knew this much. He wouldn't be walking away again. Not this time. Not from the man who once got up, bloodied and broken, just so Keanu could stay standing. He owed him more than a memory. He owed him a second look. Tomorrow, he would go back. And this time, he wouldn't just watch from a distance. He would knock on the window. He would stay. The next morning, Keanu sat in his study, surrounded by old script binders and VHS tapes. Memories from a life before red carpets and international premieres. On a whim, he'd pulled out a box labeled Early Action Projects from the back of his storage closet. It smelled faintly of dust and time. Inside were old Polaroids, marked-up call sheets, and a few worn-out behind-the-scenes shots clipped together with tape. And there he was, Mike Torres, laughing beside a burning stunt rig, arm slung over Keanu's shoulder, leather jacket half-zipped. That same scar, fresher then, curved above his brow like a badge. Keanu held the photo in his hands for a long time. A memory cracked open like a door. Flashback. It was 1992, a gritty action thriller with a ridiculous name, Steel Impact. Keanu's third lead, Mike's 12th stunt gig that year. There was a rooftop scene where Keanu's character had to escape a gunfight by jumping from one building to another, 4 stories high, with only a thin airbag and a narrow window for the landing. The studio had wanted to use a dummy or CGI. Keanu had offered to try the jump himself. Mike had shut it down immediately. "You're not dying on my watch, rookie," he'd said, grabbing the harness with a grin. The jump was brutal, windy, unpredictable. Mike landed off balance, slammed his shoulder into a vent pipe, and rolled hard into the bag. He came up gasping, teeth gritted, pain flashing behind his eyes, but he waved off the medic. "That's the take," he said. That moment became legendary. It made the trailer. It sold the scene. It helped turn Keanu into an action name. But Mike? He finished out the film, wrapped in ice packs, and faded quietly into the background. No interview, no mention, no bonus. Just pain and pride. Keanu had always told himself Mike had landed on his feet, maybe moved into choreography, maybe trained the next generation. But as he scrolled through old industry listings now, a different truth began to surface. Mike hadn't worked in years. Keanu searched deeper. Union bulletins, stunt performer boards, private blogs. That's where he found it. A forum post, 5 years old. "Anyone heard from Mike Torres? Heard he tore up his shoulder on steel impact and got cut loose. Last I saw, he was working freelance construction, barely getting by. Couldn't get coverage, no pension. Sad ending for a legend." Keanu stared at the screen, hand frozen over the mouse. Sad ending. Forgotten hero. He clicked the browser closed and sat back in silence. Whatever story he'd told himself about Mike, about how the industry took care of its own, about how hard work paid off, crumbled in that moment. The truth was simpler and far more cruel. Mike Torres had been left behind. Keanu leaned forward at his desk, elbows on his knees, his thoughts trapped somewhere between anger and disbelief. It wasn't just the accident that wrecked Mike's career, it was everything that followed. Or rather, everything that didn't. There was no insurance claim, no safety net, no lifeline. Hollywood had a way of swallowing people whole. The camera rolled, the crowd cheered, and once the lights dimmed, silence. Unless your name was above the title, you were part of the machinery. Replaceable. But Mike hadn't been a machine. He'd been a man. One who showed up early, left late, and carried more weight than anyone saw. Keanu remembered a night from Steel Impact's wrap party. Everyone had been drinking, celebrating the film's surprise early success. Keanu had been riding high, barely 28, green, still stunned by his good fortune. He and Mike had stepped outside for a breather. The street was quiet. "You ever think about what's next?" Keanu had asked. Mike took a sip of water, always staying sober on set. "For me? Doesn't matter. I show up, take the hits, and move on. That's the job. But don't you ever want more?" Mike chuckled. "I'm a stunt guy, man. We're not supposed to want more. We just make the stars look good." Keanu had laughed then, not realizing how much truth sat beneath the words. Now, years later, those words stung. Keanu stood and walked over to a shelf by the window. He pulled out one of the Steel Impact DVD covers and flipped it over. There it was, his name in bold letters, photos of explosions, guns, and stunts. But nowhere in the credits did it say, "Stunt double, Mike Torres." He flipped to the insert. Nothing. He checked the bonus features. No behind-the-scenes commentary from Mike, not even a nod. His chest tightened. Mike had sacrificed his body, his career, possibly his health, and the world had erased him. Keanu rubbed his temples and paced. All these years, he'd assumed Mike had moved on, found peace, built a quiet life away from the industry. But the man he saw in that car wasn't someone who'd found peace. He was someone the world had stopped seeing. The hardest part? Mike probably never expected to be remembered. Men like him didn't wait for applause. But they deserved it. Keanu felt something shift inside him. Not just guilt, but responsibility. This wasn't about repaying a debt. It was about honoring something that had been buried. A brotherhood, a sacrifice, a silent legacy. Keanu sat down again and opened a fresh notebook. No scripts, no scene notes. Just a name at the top of the page. Mike Torres. Below it, he began writing everything he could remember. 1991, Mike took the fall in Vancouver's shoot. 2 cracked ribs, never complained. 1992. Stepped in for me during the fire escape collapse in Toronto. Sprained ankle. Still finished the scene. 1994. Covered the rooftop drop in 1 take. Refused extra hazard pay. Said, "That's the job." He wrote until his hand cramped. Not because he needed a list, but because he needed to remember the man behind the moments. To remind himself that his success hadn't just been his own. It had been built on the backs of men who didn't need credit to feel proud. But Mike hadn't just helped build a career. He had helped shape Keanu into the man he'd become. And now he was sleeping in a parking lot, forgotten by the world that once called him irreplaceable. Keanu picked up his phone again and called an old contact in stunt coordination. "Do you remember Mike Torres?" The man on the other end paused. "Yeah, I remember him. What happened to him?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. Last I heard, he had a bad injury and never came back. Insurance never paid out. Got caught in some lawsuit mess. After that, nothing. Do you know if anyone helped him?" Honestly, the voice was quiet. Nobody knew where he went. Keanu ended the call, jaw tight. Mike hadn't walked away. He had been pushed out, quietly, efficiently, like a broken part in a machine. And the machine never looked back. Keanu stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out before him, lights flickering in every direction. Somewhere in that sea of concrete and neon, Mike was still in that car. Still invisible. But not anymore. Not to him. The industry may have forgotten. The credits may have skipped his name. But Keanu hadn't. And tomorrow, he wouldn't just knock on a window. He would show up, not as a star, not as a favor, but as a brother. Because in a business that often burns the very people who make the magic possible, Keanu had made a decision. Mike Torres would not be left behind again. The next morning, Keanu woke before sunrise. No calls, no headlines, no interviews on the calendar. Just one thing on his mind: Mike. He dressed quietly, pulling on an old gray hoodie and jeans, the same kind of outfit he wore when he wanted to disappear into the city. Before leaving the house, he packed a brown paper bag, a fresh sandwich, a hot thermos of coffee, a banana, and a sealed envelope with a small note inside. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a start. By the time he arrived at the lot, the sun was just beginning to rise over the buildings, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The same battered red Toyota sat in the corner spot. Same sleeping bag visible in the window, same chipped paint. Same silence. Keanu approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. He reached the driver's side and gently tapped on the glass. No movement. He knocked again, just a little louder. This time, the blanket stirred. A groggy face emerged, blinking at the sudden light. Mike looked older up close, more fragile. His beard was overgrown, patchy with gray. His eyes, once sharp and defiant, were dulled by exhaustion and time. He stared through the window, confused. Keanu pulled back his hood and took a step closer, giving him time to process. Mike squinted. His hand went to the window crank and slowly rolled it down a few inches. "Can I help you?" he rasped, voice hoarse from sleep, or maybe silence. Keanu gave a soft smile. "It's me, Mike." The man froze. He looked again, eyes narrowing, then widening. "Keanu?" His voice cracked on the name. "No way!" Keanu gave a small nod. "Yeah." Mike let out a quiet laugh, more a sound of disbelief than humor. "Well, I'll be damned." He didn't say anything else right away. Neither did Keanu. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years they'd never shared and stories neither had told. "I didn't think you'd remember me," Mike finally said, still stunned. "I never forgot," Keanu replied softly. "Not once." Mike looked away, his jaw tightening. "So what? You came here to what? Feel better about yourself?" Keanu held up the paper bag. "I came to bring you breakfast." Mike stared at it like it was a threat. "I don't need your charity, man." "It's not charity," Keanu said. It's breakfast. Mike shook his head, still caught between pride and pain. I'm fine. Keanu didn't argue. He just set the bag on the windshield and stepped back. I'll see you around, he said quietly. And then he turned, hands in his pockets, and walked away. Keanu didn't look back as he left the lot, but his mind didn't leave with him. The walk to his car felt heavier than it should have. Every step echoed with something unsaid. Every breath a reminder that this wasn't how things were supposed to be. Mike Torres wasn't supposed to be sleeping in the back of a car. He was the guy who used to flip off scaffolds and walk away with a grin. He was the one who once told a director, "Just roll the camera. I'll land it." And now, all he had was a rusted Toyota and a cracked window to keep the world out. Keanu sat in his car for a long while, engine off, watching the orange streaks of sunrise melt into blue. He didn't need to say more today. He'd said enough. The food was there, the note was inside. If Mike read it, good. If he threw it away, that was his choice. But Keanu wasn't walking away this time, not for good. Back in the lot, Mike sat up fully now, the blanket falling from his shoulders. He looked at the paper bag on the windshield for several minutes before finally opening the door and stepping out. His joints cracked as he moved. He rubbed his beard, sighed, and retrieved the bag. He opened the thermos. The scent of fresh coffee hit him instantly. It had been a while since he'd smelled something that warm, that real. The sandwich was still warm, wrapped neatly in parchment paper. The banana had a little brown spot, but it was ripe. At the bottom of the bag was a folded envelope. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Mike, you were there for me before anyone knew my name. You gave your body to the work and never asked for anything in return. I don't know everything you've been through, but I remember who you are. If you ever want to talk, coffee's on me. Anytime." Okay? Mike sat back down in the car, holding the note in one hand, the coffee in the other. The sandwich remained untouched in his lap. He didn't cry, but he didn't blink either. He just stared out the windshield at the rising sun, coffee warming his hands, the words warming something deeper. It had been a long time since anyone had seen him. Longer still since someone had remembered. And even longer since someone had showed up without asking him to be strong first. Mike stayed parked until the lot emptied. A few early risers came and went. No one noticed him. No one ever did. But today felt different. There was a pulse in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not adrenaline, not fear, something else. Memory. He leaned his head back and stared at the ceiling of the car. The roofliner was sagging a little, stained from years of heat and rain. He traced the scar above his brow with one finger. It had faded with time, but the ache behind it still whispered in cold weather. He remembered the fall, the heat in his shoulder, the paramedics telling him to stay still, the studio rep saying, "You'll be taken care of." Then silence. No callbacks, no settlement, no visits. The union had filed a grievance that went nowhere. The director never checked in, except Keanu. He had. Twice. A card in the hospital, a voicemail he never answered. Pride had kept Mike silent. But now, maybe silence wasn't serving him anymore. He looked down at the note again. The paper was creased, but the words were steady, kind, real. He folded it carefully and slipped it into the glove compartment like it was something valuable. Because it was. That afternoon, Keanu drove past the lot again. He didn't stop this time, just slowed down enough to glance from the road. The car was still there, but so was the empty food bag, now sitting neatly in the nearby trash can. That was enough. That was a start. He drove on, but something had shifted inside him. Something old had reawakened. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But he knew this much. He'd be back. Because sometimes the loudest help you can give someone is quiet. Just showing up. Just saying, "I remember." That evening, Mike sat in the front seat, watching the sun fade over the rooftops. The air had cooled, but it didn't feel bitter. Not tonight. He opened the glove box again, unfolded the note, and read it once more, this time slower, like it mattered. Then, without thinking too much, he reached for a pen from the dash tray, flipped the note over, and scrawled 5 shaky words on the back. "I don't know how. Yet." He stared at it, then folded it again, carefully, and tucked it into his coat pocket. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the morning. He didn't know what it would look like. But it would come, and he'd be ready to open the door when it did. Mike Torres never expected to live forever in the spotlight. He wasn't built for fame. He liked the shadows, the grind, the choreography, the trust you built on set when everyone knew the difference between real danger and movie magic. He loved the silence before a stunt, the heartbeat in his ears, the countdown in his gut, the rush of flight when gravity gave way for a few seconds. That feeling made everything worth it, until it didn't. The rooftop sequence was routine by their standards, nothing outrageous. A jump from one building to another, 15 feet of air, padded out with a thick crash mat and 2 safety spotters just off camera. They'd rehearsed it 5 times. Mike knew the angles, the trajectory, even how to land and roll without jarring his spine. But something went wrong. Wind, miscalculation, or maybe just time catching up with him. His right foot landed awkwardly, his body twisted. He hit the pad hard, too hard, and his shoulder folded beneath him like dead weight. He felt the snap before he heard it. Something gave, something deep. He couldn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. They kept rolling. The shot looked perfect. But Mike's career ended in that silence. The director called for another take. Mike waved them off, trying to stand. He could feel the bones grinding. His vision tunneled. One of the crew called for the medic. By the time they reached him, he was biting his lips so hard it bled just to keep from shouting. He was loaded into a van, not even an ambulance. The production kept going. Back in the trailer, the studio rep showed up with a clipboard. "You'll be covered, just standard paperwork. We'll send it to the union." Mike nodded, signed. He didn't read it. Mistake number 1. 3 weeks later, he got a check. One-time compensation. It barely covered the hospital bill. Physical therapy wasn't included. Neither was long-term treatment. The form had quietly listed his injury as moderate, which blocked further claims. He tried to fight it. The studio ghosted him. The union filed a grievance that went nowhere. Everyone moved on, except him. He wore the sling for 3 months. Then, a brace. Then, nothing. But the damage was done. The right shoulder wouldn't rotate cleanly. He couldn't catch himself in a roll without pain flaring down his back. A 10-foot drop became a risk, not a routine. He started getting fewer calls, then none. He tried offering training, tutoring younger stunt guys. Most smiled, nodded, thanked him for his time, then disappeared. No one wanted a broken veteran around, not when the next young hotshot could backflip without blinking. He didn't blame Keanu, never had. Keanu had always shown respect, but Mike figured maybe it was better to leave things unsaid. Better than having someone look at you with pity. Pride is a strange thing. Mike kept his back straight even when he was hurting. He smiled during job interviews, even when his shoulder throbbed so badly it felt like fire down his arm. He'd sit through meetings with directors and producers, pitching stunt ideas, suggesting safety plans. They'd nod politely, shake his hand, promise to call. The calls never came. He applied for union positions, safety supervisor, on-set trainer, even crew logistics. But the stunt world was fast-moving, flashy, young, and Mike was a reminder of what could go wrong. The months dragged on. Full savings thinned out. Rent got tight. His pickup truck became his refuge between couch hopping and weekly motel deals. When the truck died, he sold it for parts and bought a 15-year-old Toyota sedan with enough space to lie flat in the back seat. It wasn't meant to be permanent. But months turned into years. He learned the rhythms of invisibility. Which gas stations let you wash your hands in peace? Which libraries stayed open late enough to charge your phone? Where the best shelters were when winter came early? Which dumpsters had edible leftovers if you checked before dawn? He wasn't ashamed. He was surviving. Some nights he even dreamed in slow motion, his body flying through the air, his limbs twisting, his landing perfect. No pain, just applause, even if no one heard it. Then he'd wake up. Same windshield, same cracked dashboard, same breath on cold glass. And he'd start again. But he never forgot the films. He never forgot the late nights rehearsing with Keanu, choreographing each move with precision and care. Keanu had always treated him like an equal, never like a body double, never like a tool. That mattered. He still remembered the time Keanu brought him soup after a shoot, just because he'd heard Mike had the flu but didn't want to call in sick. He remembered the time they stayed behind on set, watching raw footage, just laughing like kids. So when the world went quiet, Mike chose silence. He didn't want to call Keanu, didn't want to show up with bruises and ask for help, didn't want to be the guy someone once respected who was now just a shadow. He figured if Keanu ever remembered him, it would be enough. He never expected him to show up, never expected a knock on the window, never expected warmth in a paper bag. The day Keanu showed up, Mike thought he was dreaming. Not because it was impossible, but because dreams were the only place anyone remembered him anymore. When he saw that familiar face at the window, that calm presence wrapped in quiet concern, a part of him froze. Another part wanted to open the door and collapse, but pride stood taller than hunger. So he kept the door shut and said what he always said. "I'm fine." It was easier that way, cleaner. But when Keanu walked away and left that bag on the windshield, something shifted. Not pity, not charity, just presence. A reminder that someone still remembered his name, still saw him. He didn't touch the food for hours. He wasn't sure if his stomach could handle it, but the note, he read that right away. Twice, then 3 more times. Each word chipped away at the armor he'd spent years building, layer after layer of self-protection, forged from disappointment. That night, Mike lay in the back seat and stared through the moonroof, past the grime and frost, into the stars. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel forgotten. He still didn't know what came next, but maybe tomorrow he wouldn't flinch when someone looked his way. Maybe tomorrow he'd say more than, "I'm fine." Maybe tomorrow he'd believe it. Because there, tucked in the glove box beside old receipts and spare change, was a letter that reminded him of who he used to be, and the possibility of who he might still become. Keanu didn't sleep much after that second visit. He replayed everything, Mike's voice, the defiance behind, "I'm fine," the way he clutched the bag but refused to meet Keanu's eyes. It wasn't rejection. It was something deeper. Pride, maybe. Or the fear that accepting help would somehow erase the man Mike once was. Keanu knew better than to push. But he also knew he couldn't do nothing. So he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a former security contact who now ran private background checks for studios. Discreet, trustworthy. "I need you to find someone for me," Keanu said, quietly, no leaks. "Name? Mike Torres. Used to be my stunt double. I saw him last week. He's living out of a car?" The silence on the line was telling. "You got it," the voice replied. "Give me 48 hours. Keanu hung up and leaned back in his chair. The weight of guilt hadn't eased, but it had shape now, direction. He didn't want a media moment, no headlines, no spotlight. He wanted a solution. Quiet, clean, respectful. He thought back to the old Mike, the one who used to refuse special pads, who'd tape up a busted ankle and finish the take. That man wouldn't accept pity, but he might accept partnership, purpose, A door left open. The difference would matter. 2 days later, the report came in. It was 10 pages long, printed and placed in a sealed envelope by Keanu's assistant, Beth. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he took it home, sat at the kitchen table, poured a cup of black coffee, and began reading in silence. The first few pages were basic, confirming identity, listing known aliases, old union paperwork, tax records. Then it got harder. 2013, shoulder injury, residual nerve damage, limited range of motion. 2014, denied long-term disability due to incomplete documentation. 2015, filed for emergency housing, unstable income. 2016, took jobs as day laborer, multiple missed appointments with physical therapy. 2017, attempted to start freelance stunt consulting, no clients retained. 2018, evicted from Glendale apartment, no listed next of kin. 20192023, no registered address, vehicle registration expired, likely living in car. Keanu's eyes blurred as he reached the last page. There, in bold print, subject has had no consistent medical care or housing for at least 5 years, no public criminal record, last known income, $2,100/year, reported cash labor. It hit him like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a fall. It was a free fall without a net. And no one had caught him. Until now. Keanu closed the folder gently, as if afraid the paper might bruise further. There was a fine line between helping someone and accidentally making them feel smaller in the process. He didn't want Mike to feel like a project or a rescue. That wasn't what this was. This was gratitude. This was loyalty. And above all, this was about restoring dignity, not taking it apart. He called Beth back into the room. "I need your help," he said. She nodded without question. "Tell me what to do." "First, find out the name of a quiet, high-quality general physician who does private consultations, someone who won't ask questions or leak information." Beth jotted it down. "Then find me a short-term rental, 1-bedroom, ground floor furnished, something modest near the coast. Doesn't have to be fancy, just clean and quiet." Beth looked up. "For you?" "For someone I owe more than I can explain." That night, Keanu sat by the fire pit in his backyard, notebook in hand, pen paused over the page. He started writing things down, not ideas, but questions. What does dignity look like for someone who lost everything? What does recovery feel like when pride is your only shield? How do I walk beside him without leading? The stars above blinked quietly, offering no answers, but Keanu didn't need them yet. He just needed a way forward. The next day, the wheels started turning. Beth found a doctor, Dr. Fields, a veteran physician with a private practice in a small clinic tucked behind a bookstore in Santa Monica. No press, no flash, just compassion. The rental came next. A quiet little unit near the bluffs with a small kitchen, hardwood floors, and a patio that overlooked the ocean. No frills, just peace. Then came the harder part. Keanu needed a plan to bring Mike into it all, without cornering him, without breaking whatever thread of trust had just started forming between them. No press, no announcements, no grand gestures, just presence. Keanu decided he'd start with a letter. A real one. Handwritten, folded carefully, tucked into the next meal bag he'd leave behind. He wouldn't say, "Here's what I've done for you." It would say, "Here's what I'd like to offer, if you're willing." Because this wasn't about fixing Mike's life. It was about reminding him he still had one. And someone, finally, was standing in his corner again. The following morning, Keanu drove to the same lot before the sun came up. The streets were still, the sky just starting to lighten with shades of pale blue. He parked a few rows over and walked the rest of the way on foot, careful not to make noise. Mike's car was still there, tucked in the same corner space, windows fogged from another cold night. The silhouette inside was still. Keanu gently placed a brown bag on the hood again, weighted with a bottle of juice, a bagel wrapped in foil, and a folded envelope clipped to the side. This time, he didn't wait. He just stood there a moment longer, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes resting on the roof of the car, then turned and left. Mike stirred to the sound of footsteps fading. When he sat up and saw the bag on the hood, he sighed through his nose, half gratitude, half resistance. But he opened it anyway. The food smelled fresh, real, and then he saw the envelope. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, a note written in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting. "Mike, I'm not here to change your life. I'm here because you were part of mine. There's a doctor I trust. No cost, no questions, just someone who can help. There's also a place, modest, near the ocean, yours if you want it. No pressure. If you'd rather I leave you be, I will. But if you want a door instead of a window, this is it. No cameras, no press, no strings. Just one friend showing up for another. Jake?" Mike folded the letter slowly, his hands still. He didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, embarrassment, suspicion, all of it mixed together, sitting heavy in his chest. But there was no demand in the words, no ego, just invitation. He looked out at the quiet morning. Cars were starting to pass on the street beyond the lot. Birds circled in lazy loops overhead. The world was moving, slowly, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like it might be moving toward him. He sipped the juice, took a bite of the bagel, then leaned back in his seat, staring at the paper in his hand again. He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in years, he had a choice. The rain returned that evening, falling in soft, rhythmic taps across Los Angeles, the kind of rain that blurred city lights and made even the harshest corners feel hushed. Keanu didn't mind. He preferred nights like this, quiet, unassuming, expectant. He sat in the driver's seat of his car, parked across the lot, engine off, eyes fixed on the same red Toyota that had become a symbol of something too important to ignore. The car hadn't moved. Mike was still in there, still surviving. But Keanu wasn't there to watch this time. He was there to offer something real. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up a sealed envelope, the words carefully chosen, written and rewritten in his own hand until they felt right. He stepped out of his car, rain soaking through his hoodie in seconds, and walked toward the Toyota. The world was dim, but still awake. Passing cars, distant sirens, a flickering street lamp above. He approached the windshield, hesitated, then tucked the envelope under the driver's side wiper. He stepped back once, twice, then turned and walked away. Inside the car, Mike had been half asleep, the kind of sleep that never fully rested, only numbed. But something tapped at his awareness. He sat up, rubbed the condensation from the glass with the heel of his palm, and squinted through the drizzle. No one was there, but something was on the windshield. He leaned forward, groaning at the familiar tightness in his back, opened the door, and stepped out barefoot into the puddles, his socks soaked instantly. He didn't care. He pulled the envelope from under the wiper and ducked back into the car. It was plain. No logo, no return address, just his name written in simple script. Mike. He stared at it for a while before opening it. Inside, a single sheet, neatly folded. His fingers trembled as he read the note. "You risked your body so I could rise. You never asked for anything. Now, I want to offer something back. No pressure, no cameras, just coffee. Take." Mike folded the letter slowly and set it down in the passenger seat. He leaned back, rain still pattering on the roof above. No instructions, no lecture, no pity. Just coffee. His hand hovered over the ignition, but he didn't start the car. Not yet. Instead, he sat there in the darkness, in the warmth of a gesture that asked nothing and offered everything. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a burden. He felt remembered. Mike didn't sleep that night. He tried. Closed his eyes, shifted beneath the worn blanket in the back seat, even counted the soft clicks of rain against the window. But rest never came. His mind spun in slow, tight circles around a single sheet of paper folded neatly beside him. He read the letter again and again. Each time it hit different, not because of the words, but because of who wrote them. Keanu. Not Keanu Reeves, movie star. Not Keanu Reeves, producer. Just Keanu, the guy who'd once shared a grimy set trailer, who used to bring him hot coffee during early morning call times. The kid who'd insisted on learning his own stunts because he didn't want Mike doing all the hard stuff. That Keanu had shown up again. Without cameras. Without drama. Just coffee. Mike sat up and turned the ignition key halfway, not to start the engine, but just to get the dash lights on. The clock glowed dimly. 3:12 a.m. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath mist in the air. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The lot was empty again. Silent. He reached for his boots and laced them carefully, as if the act itself might solidify the decision building inside him. He didn't know what would come of this. Didn't know what Keanu expected. But the door had been opened without pressure, just a hand extended across a long silence. By 6:45 a.m., Mike had washed his face in a gas station bathroom and combed his hair back with his fingers. It wasn't much, but it made him feel a little more human. At 7:10 a.m., he sat in the front seat of his car, gripping the steering wheel. At 7:25, he pulled out of the lot. The diner Keanu mentioned in the bottom corner of the letter was one they used to go to after rap days on set, a tiny place tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat on a side street in Venice. It hadn't changed much, still had the old neon sign, still opened early, still smelled like butter and strong coffee from a block away. Mike parked across the street. For a moment, he didn't move. His hand trembled slightly on the door handle, but then he saw him. Keanu, already inside, sitting in a corner booth, hoodie up, sipping from a white mug, face calm and unreadable. Not a production team in sight, no one else paying attention. Just two men, 30 years removed from fire escapes and rooftop falls. Mike stepped out of the car and crossed the street. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as Mike stepped inside. The warmth hit him first. Steam from the kitchen, the hiss of eggs on the griddle, the low murmur of early regulars tucked in booths. Everything smelled like comfort, like memory, like something he hadn't known he missed. Keanu looked up the moment the door opened, his eyes catching Mike's like he'd been waiting the whole time. No wave, no grin, just a quiet nod that said, "I see you." Mike walked toward the booth slowly, each step a negotiation between nerves and something deeper. Hope, maybe, though he wouldn't dare name it just yet. When he reached the table, Keanu slid a mug across to the empty seat. Black, just like you used to take it. Mike glanced at the mug, then at Keanu. "You sure I'm not dreaming?" he asked, voice low and rough. Keanu smiled faintly. "If you are, then we both are." Mike sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The coffee sat untouched between them. Finally, Keanu leaned in slightly. "I meant what I said in the letter. No pressure, no expectations. I just thought you might want company that doesn't look at you sideways." Mike snorted under his breath. That's rare." "I know." He picked up the mug, warming his hands around it, and took a sip. It burned a little. It was perfect. "This place hasn't changed," he muttered, glancing around. "Nope," Keanu said. "Still plays Springsteen on Saturdays. Still messes up the pancakes." Mike chuckled. "And you still remember the details?" "I remember the people." A silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt like breath, like room being made for something that hadn't had space in a long time. "You didn't have to do this," Mike said finally. "I know," Keanu replied. "But I wanted to." Mike looked down at the coffee, then back at the man across from him. "I'm not good at this." "You don't have to be." Another beat. Then Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He didn't slide it across the table. just set it down gently between them. "This is the address. A place that's yours if you want it. Month to month. No commitments, just peace and a key." Mike stared at it. No grand pitch, no urgency. Just the same quiet offer wrapped in respect. He didn't reach for it. But he didn't push it away either. The coffee was still hot. The rain had stopped. And for the first time in a long time, Mike didn't feel like the past. He felt present. The diner buzzed gently around them. Plates clinking, coffee being poured, a young couple laughing at a corner booth. But inside their little corner of the world, time had slowed. Mike stared out the window, fingers wrapped around his second cup of coffee. He hadn't said much after Keanu placed the envelope on the table. He hadn't needed to. His silence carried decades. "I don't know what you're expecting," Mike said finally, voice low. "Some sort of redemption arc? Man gets a second chance, walks into the sunset?" Keanu shook his head once. "No." "Then why me? You could write a check, build a shelter, donate somewhere, but you show up in my lot, offer me coffee like I'm still somebody. You are somebody." Mike scoffed. "I'm a guy who broke and didn't bounce back. You're a guy who caught me more times than I can count, on rooftops, on wires, in fire." Mike looked down. "That was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it stopped mattering." Mike shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, not because of the attention, but because it wasn't coming from pity, and that made it harder to deflect. "I was doing okay at first," he said. "After the injury, I thought maybe I'd consult, train younger guys. But the calls dried up. And when I did try, doors were closed before I even knocked." "Because of the injury?" Mike nodded. "Yeah, that, and age. Nobody wants a limping vet reminding them they're one bad fall away from vanishing." Keanu didn't interrupt. He just let the words come. "I should have called someone. Anyone. I thought about reaching out to you once, but pride's a hell of a wall to climb." Keanu leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "What if help didn't come from pity, but from brotherhood?" Mike didn't answer, but his eyes, wet now, blinking hard, said everything. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of what they both knew but had never said. "Why didn't you call?" Mike asked after a moment, and the question wasn't angry, just honest. Keanu hesitated. "I thought you'd moved on. I thought you were okay." Mike nodded slowly. "Guess we both thought wrong." They both sat with that truth for a moment, what had been lost to assumption, to silence, to pride. Then Keanu added gently, "I'm not here to fix you, Mike. I just don't want you disappearing." Mike exhaled slowly, as if releasing 10 years of breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I don't want that either," he said. Mike leaned back in the booth, shoulders sagging, not from defeat but from letting go. For the first time in years, he wasn't bracing for judgment or waiting for someone to walk away mid-conversation. He looked at Keanu, his expression torn between gratitude and disbelief. "You know what scared me most?" Mike asked. "It wasn't the pain, wasn't the rejection. It was the thought that everything I did, all those years, didn't mean a damn thing." Keanu didn't flinch. "It meant everything." Mike smirked, trying to mask emotion behind sarcasm. "You always this sentimental?" Keanu smiled. "Only for the ones who never asked for credit." The waitress dropped off a plate of toast and refilled their mugs. Neither touched the food. "I used to dream," Mike said after a moment, his voice softer now. "Not about stardom, but about doing something that mattered. Thought maybe I'd open a small stunt school someday, teach kids who didn't fit the Hollywood mold. You know, the quiet ones, the oddballs, like I was." "Why didn't you?" Keanu asked. "Because no one wants to fund a broken man with no address," Mike replied bluntly. "The system doesn't care once you stop bleeding on camera." They both knew it was true. Hollywood had a short memory, and shorter patience for vulnerability. "But the thing is," Mike continued, "I didn't hate it out there, the cold nights, the car. I hated how invisible it made me feel, like I'd been erased. Keanu nodded slowly. That's what hit me the hardest when I saw you. Not the car, not the scars, but that no one saw you anymore. Mike looked up, eyes sharp. But you did. I always did. For a moment, the two men sat in the aftermath of those words, like survivors of the same storm, finally acknowledging they'd both been hit. I don't want a handout, Mike said again, voice steady. But I'm tired of pretending I don't want anything. You don't need to pretend anymore. Another beat of silence passed. Then Mike glanced down at the envelope still resting on the table between them. That place you mentioned, the one near the ocean. Keanu nodded. Mike ran a finger over the edge of the envelope. What's it like? Quiet, safe, window faces the morning light. Mike nodded once, not ready to say yes, but no longer resisting the possibility of it. And that, Keanu knew, was enough. Mike took a breath and finally reached for the envelope, slipping it into his coat pocket. Not as a promise, but as something real, something he could hold on to. I know what I'm walking into, he admitted. You don't have to, Keanu replied. You just have to walk. Mike nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth tugging upward, not quite a smile, but close. You always this calm about throwing people into the unknown? Keanu laughed under his breath. You threw me off a building once without warning. Consider this payback. Mike chuckled, and the sound, light, human, full, felt like a memory rising from deep water. Remember that shoot in Arizona, he said suddenly, when we filmed that desert chase scene and you lost your voice from all the shouting? Keanu smirked. You mean the one where you sprained your ankle and still sprinted through take 3? Mike leaned back, eyes far away now. Yeah. That was the last time I felt necessary. You still are. Mike didn't respond, but he didn't argue either. Outside, the streetlights blinked off as morning took full hold. Inside, the booth felt warmer now, not because of the diner's old radiator, but because of what had been said and what didn't need to be. As they stood to leave, Keanu pulled a small key from his pocket and held it out. Mike looked at it, hesitant. I'm not pushing, Keanu said, just placing it here. He set it on the table. Mike didn't pick it up, but he didn't walk away from it either. I'll think about it, he said. Keanu nodded. That's all I ask. They walked to the door together, the air outside brisk but not biting. As they reached the sidewalk, Mike turned. You really showed up, he said. I always meant to, Keanu replied. Mike looked away, then back, eyes clear. Feels weird saying this, but thanks for not turning me into a headline. Keanu smiled. Some things are meant to stay between brothers. Mike nodded, then started toward his car. Halfway there, he stopped, turned back, and walked to the table inside to grab the key. He didn't say anything when he slipped it into his pocket. But Keanu saw the difference in his step. Less weight, more ground beneath it. The door hadn't just opened. Mike had walked through. The guest house sat tucked behind a quiet, single-level home near the California coast, just a block from where the cliffside met the ocean. It wasn't large, maybe 800 square feet, but it had clean floors, a working heater, a soft bed, and most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. For the first 2 nights, Mike didn't unpack his bag. He slept on top of the comforter, fully dressed, boots near the side of the bed, as if part of him didn't believe the space was real, or that it would last. But the ocean didn't leave, and neither did the quiet. On the 3rd morning, a knock came at the door. Mike opened it slowly to find Keanu standing there with a bag of groceries and a small envelope. This isn't charity, Keanu said before Mike could speak. It's what you do for me. Mike stepped aside. You're lucky I like black coffee. Keanu grinned and walked in. They didn't talk much that morning. Keanu put away the groceries while Mike stared out the back window at the sea beyond the hedge. Inside the envelope was a small card. Dr. Ellen Fields, 11 a.m. Private consultation. No charge, no records, just care. Mike looked up. Keanu shrugged. If you want to go, I'll drive. He went. The doctor's office was small, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar and mint. Dr. Fields was in her early 60s, gentle and focused. She didn't ask about the past, she asked about now, about pain, about stiffness, about the last time he'd had a full checkup. Mike had no answers, not real ones. So she made a plan. Blood work, physical therapy, a shoulder specialist, nutritional support, weekly check-ins. Mike agreed to all of it, not because someone told him to, but because, for once, someone had asked. Later that week, Keanu dropped by again, this time with a dusty plastic bin. "What's this?" Mike asked. Keanu set it on the coffee table. "Memories." Inside were old DVDs, behind-the-scenes featurettes, stunt reels, brawl footage from shoots neither of them remembered fully. Mike stared at the labels. His name was on some of them. He pulled one out, Steel Impact 1992, Stunt Team Cut. They watched it on the old DVD player Keanu had dug out from storage. The screen flickered, the audio crackled, and there he was. Mike, 20 years younger, leaping through glass, dodging fire, landing like a superhero, laughing behind a smoke machine. His eyes welled up, but he didn't look away. Not this time. Mike didn't say much while the DVD played. He sat forward on the couch, elbows resting on his knees, eyes locked to the screen like he was watching someone else, someone stronger, someone who used to move with confidence, precision, and fire. The screen showed him backflipping off scaffolding, dodging explosions, sprinting through smoke. Keanu stood just behind the camera in most of the behind-the-scenes clips, watching, learning, smiling like a kid. Mike rubbed his jaw slowly. His hand trembled, but he didn't try to hide it. "That guy," he said after a long silence. "He thought he had a future." Keanu glanced over. "He still does." Mike let out a breath. "I forgot what it felt like. To be part of something that mattered. You were never the background, you were the frame." Mike blinked a few times, then reached for the remote and paused the video. His reflection looked back at him faintly in the blank screen. Older, weathered, but still him. "I want to remember this," he said. "He will." The next morning, Mike showed up early to his physical therapy appointment. Not just on time, early. The receptionist raised her eyebrows. Dr. Fields smiled. He did the exercises. He stretched further than last time. He gritted through the pain. Later that week, Keanu introduced him to a friend who ran a local gym. It wasn't glamorous, just an old-school training spot that catered to boxers, martial artists, and guys trying to rebuild their bodies and their confidence. Mike didn't say much at first. He mopped floors, cleaned mats, listened. Then one day, a young stunt hopeful walked in asking about strength training. The gym owner motioned toward Mike without hesitation. "This guy used to land harder than anyone I knew. Listen to him." The kid looked doubtful at first, until Mike spoke. He explained how to land with soft knees, how to breathe through a fall, how to protect your back and still make the shot look good. The kid nodded, wide-eyed, took notes, and when he left, Mike just stood there for a moment, still holding a towel in his hand. He didn't say it out loud, but the feeling was clear. He had something to give again. Not a headline, not a comeback. Something better. Purpose. That night, Keanu stopped by again. He brought dinner this time. Just take-out burgers and fries, nothing fancy, but it tasted like childhood, like movie sets and late-night laughs in trailer kitchens. They ate on the small porch of the guest house, watching the waves roll quietly in the distance. Keanu pulled out another DVD. This one was older, their first film together. "Remember this?" he asked, holding it up. Mike grinned. "I remember blowing my ankle out on take 2. You still finished the shoot." Mike leaned back in his chair. "Stubbornness, and maybe a little showmanship." Keanu nodded. "You always made it look good." They didn't talk about pain that night, or lost years, or pride. They just watched the movie again, This time with laughter, with pause and rewinds, with memories surfacing they hadn't touched in decades. Mike didn't cry this time. He smiled. And near the end, as the credits rolled and his name appeared under the word stunt double, he whispered something barely louder than the sea breeze. "I missed this, all of it." Keanu didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on Mike's shoulder and left it there. Not as comfort, as confirmation. Before bed, Mike pulled out a notebook. It wasn't the first page anymore. There were notes now, appointments, things he'd learned from the young guys at the gym, shoulder exercises from Dr. Fields. He added one more thing that night. "Watched myself fly." Still here, still learning. He capped the pen and closed the book. Then he stepped outside one last time before sleep. The air was cooler, clean, the kind of night that invited you to stay up and think, or just breathe. Mike didn't need to say it out loud. This place, this silence, this life. It didn't feel temporary anymore. He looked at the guest house behind him, the porch where they'd laughed, the couch where he'd cried without shame, the mirror where he'd finally looked himself in the eyes again. It was slow. It was quiet. But healing had started. Not because someone gave him a second chance, because someone reminded him he was still worth one. Keanu knew exactly when to show up. It had been a few weeks since Mike moved into the guest house. He was sticking to his appointments, showing up at the gym, even teaching a few eager kids how to fall safely without getting hurt. But something was still missing, a piece of him that hadn't come back yet. So one Saturday afternoon, Keanu pulled into the driveway with a flatbed trailer hitched to his truck. Mike stepped out to see what the noise was about. Keanu motioned him over. No words, just a grin. On the trailer were 3 motorcycles in various states of ruin, one with a busted chain, one with no seat, one with rusted handlebars and a bent frame. Mike stared at them like someone recognizing old friends from another lifetime. "These yours?" he asked. "They're yours now," Keanu replied. Mike shook his head. "Come on, man. I've had these in storage for years. They're classics, but I never got around to fixing them. Thought maybe you'd want a project." Mike walked up to the trailer, ran his hand along the chipped tank of a 1972 Norton Commando. "This one used to be a beast," he said. "Still, can be." Keanu led him around to the back of the property. There, tucked beside a storage shed, was a 2-car garage, clean, quiet, and already outfitted with basic tools. A bench had been cleared. A shelf was stacked with oil, spark plugs, even a fresh toolbox that still had the tags on it. Mike looked around slowly. "You set this up?" Keanu shrugged. "I remembered what you used to do between takes." Mike smiled for real. "Tinkering. Always helped me think." "Exactly." He stepped inside, ran his hands over the workbench, then opened one of the drawers in the toolbox. Every socket, wrench, and hex key was in place. It felt like someone had built him a sanctuary. Not flashy, not loud, just honest. That afternoon, Mike wheeled the Norton into the garage. He didn't try to fix anything right away. He just sat beside it, notebook in hand, sketching out what he'd need. He wrote down a list of parts, estimated hours, even wrote down a title across the top of the page. Rebuild 1? Keanu stopped by later that evening with dinner and 2 mugs of coffee. They didn't talk about Hollywood. They didn't talk about the past. They talked about bikes, about chain tension, about the sound of an engine when it's just about to catch. Mike's voice was steady, confident. He was in his element again. Over the next week, the garage became Mike's second home. He started waking up early, even before the sun came over the coast. Most mornings, he'd pour a cup of coffee, step outside to breathe in the sea air, then walk straight to the garage in work boots and an old flannel shirt. The bikes were waiting. He started with the Norton. At first it was slow, cleaning off years of dust and grime, taking pictures, labeling parts, sketching diagrams in his notebook. He didn't rush anything. He respected the machine. Each bolt held a story. Each scratch was a timeline. Keanu dropped by often, always with something small in hand, a bag of brake pads, a new rearview mirror, a sandwich from the local deli. He never hovered. He just stood nearby, sometimes with a wrench in hand, pretending to help, but mostly watching. Mike didn't seem to mind. They fell into a rhythm, working in silence, then talking when the moment invited it. Some days they shared old film stories. Other times, they just listened to the sound of the socket wrench turning. It wasn't just a rebuild. It was therapy with grease under their nails. One afternoon, Keanu asked, "You ever miss it? The stunt life?" Mike didn't answer right away. He was tightening the rear brake assembly, eyes focused, hands steady. "Not the bruises," he said finally. "Not the hospital bills." He looked up. "But yeah, I miss flying. I miss feeling invincible for a few seconds at a time." Keanu nodded. "You always made it look easy." It never was. Mike set the wrench down and wiped his hands with a rag. "But it felt worth it. Every take, every fall. Because I believed in what we were doing. Not the paycheck. The trust." Keanu leaned against the wall. "That's what I remember most. You never showed off. You just showed up." Mike smiled faintly. "You remembered that. I never forgot." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Mike picked up his notebook from the corner of the bench, flipped a few pages, then paused. He read something out loud without looking up. "Pain taught me to hide. Kindness is teaching me to live again." Keanu looked over. "You wrote that?" Mike closed the book gently. "Yeah, I guess I did." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't meant to impress. It was just truth. And sometimes, truth spoken without apology was more powerful than any stunt ever filmed. The next morning, the sound of tools echoed through the property before Keanu even stepped outside. He found Mike already elbow-deep in the engine of the second bike, a Honda CB750 stripped to the frame. His sleeves were rolled up. His notebook was open on the workbench beside a cup of black coffee that had gone cold. Keanu leaned in the doorway, just watching. Mike didn't notice him at first. He was humming softly, fully focused, the sound of a man who had returned to something he didn't know he missed. Keanu eventually stepped in and offered a hand with the lift. Mike accepted it without a word. This time, there was no hesitation, no discomfort, just two men working together the way they used to, on sets, under pressure, building scenes that no one knew they bled for. Only now, there were no cameras. Just restoration. Later that day, they stood outside the garage, wiping their hands as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Mike looked toward the open door, at the bikes they'd brought back to life. The Norton was almost finished, the Honda was coming along, and the third, a Triumph Bonneville, waited patiently in the corner. Keanu followed his gaze. "You thinking of starting your own shop?" Mike smiled but didn't answer right away. "I'm thinking maybe I've still got something to give," he said. Keanu turned to him. "You never stopped." Mike looked out toward the horizon. "I don't want to go backward. I don't need to be who I was. I just want to be useful. Steady." "No, you are?" Mike didn't reply, but his shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't in years. That night, he sat at his desk in the guest house and opened his notebook again. He didn't overthink it. He wrote slowly, deliberately. "Today, I taught someone how to clean a carburetor." He said no one ever explained it to him before. He smiled when it worked. I smiled back. It felt like flight. He closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the sound of waves in the distance. His body still ached, some scars still stung, but for once, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something was returning. And in the garage, waiting for tomorrow, stood the final bike. Not a project, a symbol that some things don't need to be new to be worthy. They just need to be rebuilt with care. It started with a question asked over coffee. Keanu stirred cream into his mug and said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. "How would you feel about visiting a film set again?" Mike blinked. "Set? You mean like visiting? Keanu shook his head. Consulting. There's a new action film coming together. The choreography's a mess. They need someone who knows how it works. I told the director I had just the guy." Mike let out a quiet laugh, part surprise, part discomfort. "Keanu, I haven't stepped onto a set in 15 years. Keanu nodded. "That's why you're perfect. You haven't forgotten what matters." Mike looked down into his cup. "You sure they'd even want someone like me? Things change fast in that world." "They may haven't changed as much as you think." Mike didn't answer, he just nodded slowly. That night he sat with his notebook again. He flipped past pages filled with oil notes and diagrams, all the way to a blank one. He wrote a single sentence. Would I be enough without the stunts? Then he shut the book. He didn't answer the question. Not yet. 3 days later, Keanu texted him an address and a time. Mike stood in front of the wardrobe in the guest house, holding a plain black button-up shirt and a clean pair of jeans. He stared at his reflection for a long moment before pulling them on. He didn't recognize the man in the mirror completely, but he didn't flinch from him either. When he arrived at the studio lot, Keanu met him at the gate. No cameras, no grand introduction, just a quiet, "Let's walk." They moved through the lot like ghosts from a different era. Some crew members nodded as Keanu passed, then turned curious glances toward Mike. Few recognized him, even fewer knew why he was there. They entered a soundstage where a fight sequence was being rehearsed. 3 young stunt performers were walking through moves that lacked flow, tension, rhythm. The director noticed Keanu and waved. Then he saw Mike and raised an eyebrow. Keanu leaned in and whispered, "Just observe. If you feel like jumping in, do. If not, no pressure." Mike folded his arms, watching carefully. He could see the problem immediately. No anchor points, no grounding. The choreography was flashy, but the story wasn't there. It looked like movement for movement's sake. He shifted his stance, stepped forward. "Can I?" he asked quietly. The director hesitated, then nodded. Mike stepped into the space like he'd never left. He didn't bark orders, he didn't brag. He just asked questions. What's the emotional beat here? What does the hit mean for the character? Where is your eye line on the swing? He moved slowly, carefully, demonstrated with respect, gave small notes that made big differences. By the end of the hour, the crew wasn't glancing at him like a stranger anymore. They were leaning in, listening. And Mike? He was standing taller, like his body remembered how to lead, like his mind never forgot how to teach. By lunchtime, word had spread. A few of the younger stunt actors started whispering about who the guy in the black shirt really was. Someone pulled out an old stunt reel on their phone. There he was, Mike Torres, mid-air, leaping off a bridge in a fireball, landing clean, rolling into frame. One of the guys looked at Mike across the room, eyes wide. "Dude, that's him?" Keanu just smiled. Mike caught the glance but said nothing. He was back in the rehearsal space, helping one of the performers fix a grip issue with their harness. "You're swinging too wide," he explained. "Shorten your reach, drop the elbow, and keep your knees loose. You'll flow right into it." The performer tried it. "Nailed it." "Better," Mike said with a quiet nod. "Much better." When they broke for a short crew meeting, the director pulled Keanu aside. "Where the hell did you find him?" he asked. Keanu smiled again. "Same place all the best stories come from. The past. He's sharp, like really sharp." Keanu just nodded. "Told you." Mike didn't hear the compliment. He was in the back corner, watching a playback screen, scribbling a few things in his notebook. Old habit, one he didn't know he'd missed. Later that day, when the last take wrapped, the director approached him directly. "You know," he said, "we could use a guy like you on this. Not just today, for the whole run. We need a real stunt coordinator, someone who gets it." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You brought clarity, no ego. That's rare." Mike didn't give an answer right away. He just glanced at Keanu, who had already turned to walk away, giving him space. That said more than any conversation could have. Back at the guest house that night, Mike kicked off his boots and sat at the edge of the bed. He didn't turn on the lights, just let the glow of the moon spill across the floor. Then he reached for his notebook, opened to a new page. Today, I walked back into the world I thought had forgotten me. It hadn't. It was just waiting for me to stop hiding. He closed the book and sat back. No part of him needed validation, but every part of him welcomed purpose. He wasn't back for fame. He wasn't even back for closure. He was back because someone believed in him enough to remind him he was still the real deal. And now, others could see it too. The crew started arriving earlier than usual. Some came in just to watch Mike run warm-ups with the stunt team. There was no yelling, no drama, no pushing anyone past their limits. Just quiet authority, confidence built from years of falling and learning how to rise. Mike stood in front of a group of 5 young stunt performers, all under 30, each one full of energy and uncertainty. He clapped his hands once. "Let's talk landings." They circled around him. Mike pointed to the crash mats. "Most of you think the goal is to make it look painful, but the real art is control. You're selling chaos while protecting your spine." One of the younger guys raised his hand. "Did you ever do high falls?" Mike smiled. "Once dropped 40 feet into a moving flatbed, night shoot, no wires, just timing." Their eyes widened. "Did it hurt?" someone asked. "Everywhere," Mike said, "but I landed clean." They laughed, but the lesson stuck. Later that day, a young actor named Jay was struggling with a vault sequence over a moving platform. It wasn't a stunt double scene. He had to do it himself. Mike pulled him aside gently. "You got too much tension in your core," he said. "Let the motion guide you. Trust the pad." Jay looked nervous. "What if I blow the take?" "Then we do it again. What matters is the rhythm, not the record." Jay reset, ran the sequence again, this time with Mike's words in his head, and nailed it. When he landed, he looked back toward the sidelines. Mike gave him a small nod. Later, during lunch, Jay sat across from him at the craft table. "Thanks for the tips today," he said. "Have you been on sets long?" Mike smiled. "Here and there." Jay chewed for a second, then added, "You kind of remind me of the old school guys, the ones who used to back up the big names." Keanu, who had just walked up with a cup of tea, raised an eyebrow and sat beside Mike. Jay looked between them and shrugged. "Anyway, whoever you used to be, I'm glad you're here now." Mike didn't correct him. He just raised his bottle of water and said, "Me too." That evening, the production hosted a quiet dinner in a courtyard behind the studio lot. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, paper plates, warm lights strung overhead. It was just crew, cast, and a shared breath after a long week. Keanu waited until everyone had a drink in hand. He stood and raised his glass. "I want to toast someone who doesn't like being put in the spotlight," he said. The crowd smiled, already turning toward Mike. Keanu waited for the laughter to fade before continuing. "There was a time in my life," he said, "when I thought the only thing keeping me safe on set was luck. Then I met someone who made sure it wasn't luck. It was trust." Mike stared down at his plate, unsure whether to smile or disappear. "This man," Keanu went on, "caught me more times than I can count. On camera, off camera, in moments when I didn't even realize I was falling." He turned toward Mike now. "And the thing is, he never asked for thanks, never asked for credit, never asked for a second chance. So tonight, I want to say what I should have said a long time ago." He raised his glass higher. "To the man who caught me before I ever fell." The crowd lifted their glasses. "To Mike," they echoed. Mike lifted his bottle slowly. His eyes were wet, but he didn't hide them. "To all of you," he said, "for reminding me I'm still here." The toast wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was respectful. It was earned. After the dinner, Mike sat on a bench near the lot gate, watching the crew pack up lights and cables. Jay sat beside him, quiet for a moment before speaking. "Someone told me today you used to be the guy behind all the action in those 90s classics." Mike chuckled. "That rumor's mostly true." Jay looked over. "Why didn't you say anything?" Mike shrugged. "Because I'm not here to relive what I did. I'm here to help you with what you're about to do." Jay nodded slowly. "You're the kind of teacher this industry needs." Mike smiled. "We're all just passing the torch. One grip, one leap, one landing at a time." Later that night, back at the guest house, Mike opened his notebook. He didn't write much, just a single sentence. "Today, I was seen, not as who I was, but as who I am." He closed the book, set it on the table beside him, and turned off the light. The day had been long, emotional, unexpected. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't exhausted. He was full, and outside, the ocean whispered softly in the distance. Tomorrow, he would be back on set, not as a stuntman, as a mentor, a builder of confidence, a keeper of craft. And this time, everyone knew his name. The credits rolled slowly on the small television in the corner of the trailer. Mike sat alone, arms crossed, coffee cooling on the table beside him. It had been a long day, a good one. The stunt crew had nailed a full chase sequence on the first take. No injuries, clean landings, everything tight. The film was a mid-budget action drama, nothing flashy, but it had heart, and it had something else. As the credits reached the end, Mike's eyes scanned the screen. Then he saw it. Torres, stunt advisor. 2 seconds of screen time, white text on black. But his name was there. And for a moment, he didn't move. He just stared, breathing in something quiet, something full, not pride. Peace. Over the next few weeks, word started spreading. And there was this guy, an old-school pro, who didn't care about flash, who taught stunts like it was an art, not a job, who treated rookies with the same respect he gave directors. Studios started calling. Not a lot, just enough. Mike didn't chase anything. He didn't post on social media. He didn't hand out business cards. He just showed up, did the work, and left quietly. But every time, someone learned something new. One set, then another, and slowly his schedule filled. On a Tuesday morning in San Diego, he spoke at a stunt safety workshop hosted by a local film academy. The auditorium was filled with 20-somethings in sneakers and hoodies, all buzzing with energy. Most had never heard of him, but within 5 minutes, they were silent, listening, writing notes, asking questions. He walked them through real falls and fake ones, how to manage momentum, where to position pads so the camera hides them, but the body still lands safely. Then he stopped and said something they didn't expect. "This job is not about being fearless, it's about being ready." The room went still. "Your body is your tool, but your mind is your compass. Know both, or you'll burn out fast." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Did you ever burn out?" Mike smiled. "Almost." She nodded, as if that answer meant more than a yes or no ever could. Afterward, a student approached him outside, notebook in hand. "My dad used to talk about a guy named Torres," he said. "Said you could fall off anything and make it look good." Mike smiled. "Tell your dad I still can." Later that week, Mike received a call from a rehab center just outside Burbank. It was from a coordinator he used to know, a guy named Terry who had done car flips and stair falls back in the day. Terry had torn both ACLs on a shoot 10 years ago and never worked again. He'd fallen into addiction and disappeared from most contact lists. Now he was recovering. "They might said you might come by," the receptionist told Mike when he arrived. Terry was thinner than Mike remembered, face hollowed, beard gray and patchy, but his eyes still had a flicker of that old edge. When Mike walked into the room, Terry blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "Torres?" he said. Mike gave him a crooked grin. Still standing, Terry let out a low laugh. Barely. They sat for an hour, then 2. No lectures, no pity. Just conversation between men who had once thrown themselves down stairwells for a living, now learning how to stand in new ways. Before Mike left, he handed Terry a card. Not for a job, just a garage address. a place to visit when he was ready, a place with tools and coffee and quiet. Terry stared at the card for a long time. Didn't think anyone remembered me. I did, Mike answered. Back on set a few days later, Mike was reviewing a rooftop stunt setup when Keanu showed up, unannounced. He didn't interrupt, just stood at the edge of the lot, hands in his jacket pockets, watching. After the scene wrapped, Mike walked over. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said. Keanu smiled. "Didn't want to miss this." "This?" Keanu pointed toward the crew. A young woman was running through a controlled wire lift. Two others practiced rolls on a mat Mike had set up that morning. A new guy asked about spine alignment during a fall. "This," Keanu repeated. "You. Teaching. Restoring. Building something that lasts." Mike looked out across the lot. He hadn't thought of it like that. But Keanu wasn't wrong. "You're not just back," Keanu added. "You're leading." Mike gave a small nod. "I'm still learning too." Keanu's voice was quiet. "That's why they trust you." They didn't say anything else for a while. They just stood side by side, two men who had once shared fire and glass and camera setups, and now shared something deeper. Not a career, a calling. Mike turned and said, "Thanks for watching from a distance." Keanu smiled. "Always have, always will." That weekend, Mike returned to the garage. Not to wrench, to think. He stood in front of the Triumph Bonneville he still hadn't touched, the last of the 3 bikes Keanu had brought him. It was old, heavy, and in worse shape than the others, but it had lines that reminded him of youth, of motion, of moments spent riding with nothing but wind and freedom. He reached for his notebook and opened to a blank page. "I thought I needed the past to remember who I was, but maybe I needed the present to see who I'd become." He set the notebook down, picked up a rag, and began wiping the dust off the frame. No rush, just purpose. Later that day, he got a text from Jay, the young actor from the earlier shoot. Booked a role on another film. Asked if I could bring my own stunt advisor. Gave them your name. Hope that's okay. Mike stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a simple reply. "Let's work." The next week, Mike's name appeared in another credit sequence. Different film, different city, same title, Torres, stunt advisor. This time, someone sent him a photo. His name, paused on the screen, bright against the dark background. Underlined, framed, like it had always been there. He saved the photo to his phone and never said a word about it. But every once in a while, he opened it, just to remind himself it hadn't been a dream. Keanu never mentioned the credits. He didn't need to. He showed up where it mattered. At the rap parties, at the training sessions, at the late-night coffee drop-offs. Quiet, proud, in ways that didn't need words. One night, as the sun dipped low behind the ocean, the 2 men sat on the porch of the guest house again, just like they had months ago. Same chairs, same laughter, same ease. Mike looked at Keanu and said, "You knew this was still in me." Keanu shrugged. "You just needed space to believe it too." They didn't toast, didn't cheer. They just sat in the hush of evening. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out his notebook, flipped to a page, read a line softly. Motion doesn't always mean running. Sometimes it just means moving forward. Keanu nodded. And somewhere down the coast, a crew was prepping for a film shoot. One of them would look at the call sheet the next morning. See the name, Torres, and not just recognize it. They'd respect it. The photo was old, taken during their first film together, a behind-the-scenes snapshot where Keanu stood in costume, laughing mid-sentence, and Mike stood beside him, bruised from a fall, grinning just as wide. The slate board was barely in frame. The lights behind them were harsh. It wasn't a perfect photo, technically, but it was real. Mike found it tucked in the back of a manila folder buried in the garage. He had no idea how it survived all the moves and storage bins. But there it was. A moment in time, 2 men before the years stretched between them. He brushed the dust from its corners and stared at it for a long time. Then he took it into town. The frame shop owner looked surprised when Mike walked in with the photo and a folded piece of paper. "You want this matted under the glass?" the man asked, holding up the paper. Mike nodded. "Underneath. Like a caption." The framer unfolded it and read the line out loud. "Your legacy isn't the fall. It's the moment you got up." He looked back at Mike, eyes narrowing with recognition. "You're that guy. The stuntman from those old films, right?" Mike gave a tired smile. Still standing, the man nodded with quiet respect. "You want this done right, don't you?" Mike looked him in the eye. "I do." A week later, the framed photo hung on the wall above Mike's desk in the guest house. It wasn't large, it didn't dominate the room, but it changed the space. It anchored it. The quote below the image drew the eye. Visitors read it out loud, then grew silent. And every morning before heading out to consult or train or teach, Mike looked at it for just a second. Not out of vanity, out of grounding. It reminded him that who he had been and who he had become were not different men, just different stages of the same one. That evening, Mike sat at his desk with a fountain pen and a thick piece of stationery. He began to write, not because it was owed, because it needed to be said. "Dear Keanu, there was a time when I couldn't look in the mirror, when I thought every title, every scar, every fall I'd taken had led nowhere. I was wrong. You reminded me who I was before the pain, and who I still am after it. You didn't rescue me, you saw me. That was enough, and that changed everything. Mike." He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into a plain envelope, and without a return address, he left it on Keanu's porch. Keanu found the envelope late that night. He had returned from a long shoot, shoes kicked off at the door, shoulders still tight from the day. At first, he thought it was another script someone had dropped off, but when he picked it up, he saw the handwriting. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't printed, it was real. He sat down in his den, opened it gently, and began to read. By the second sentence, his hands had stilled. By the final words, he was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, the letter held like something sacred. He didn't cry, but he didn't move for a long time either. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Outside, the wind moved the trees. Inside, a man known by millions sat in silence, with a single page of truth resting between his fingers. Then he stood and walked to the back of the room. In the corner, under a small shelf lined with things no one ever saw, tokens from a private life, he opened a small wooden box. Inside were only 3 items: a faded postcard from his sister Kim, a dried flower from Jennifer's memorial, and a letter he had once written but never sent. He added Mike's letter to the box, not out of nostalgia, out of reverence, because not everything meaningful needs to be public. Some things are only meant to be remembered. The next morning, Keanu returned to the guest house. Mike was in the garage, wrench in hand, halfway through rebuilding the front forks of the Triumph. He looked up, gave a nod. "Let her find you okay?" Keanu smiled. It did. Neither of them spoke more on it. They didn't need to. Instead, Keanu rolled up his sleeves and joined in. They spent the afternoon covered in grease, passing tools back and forth, arguing over torque values, and laughing over who had lost more hearing over the years. There was no crew, no schedule, just 2 men who had made it through, together. Later that night, Keanu stood at the threshold of the guest house as Mike leaned in the doorway. "Still think about the first time I saw you in that car," Keanu said quietly. Mike chuckled. "I probably hadn't shaved in 2 weeks. You looked like hell." Mike grinned. "Felt worse." Keanu looked up toward the small window where the framed photo now hung. The light from inside made the quote glow faintly beneath the glass. Mike saw him notice it. "I meant it," he said. Keanu nodded. "So did I." They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They just stood there, present. And that was enough. The next morning, Mike opened the garage early. He didn't turn on the lights, just let the sun pour in through the windows as it always did, soft and golden, warming the concrete floors like a gentle reminder that every day started new. He looked at the Triumph. It still wasn't finished, but it was close. He walked to the workbench and flipped open his notebook, now worn at the edges and full of more than just mechanical notes. It had sketches, quotes, names of people he'd helped, places he'd visited, pieces of himself he'd recovered along the way. He added one more line. Legacy isn't what's framed. It's what you leave behind in other people's hands. He smiled, closed the notebook, and set it back on the shelf. That afternoon, a delivery arrived. A package wrapped in brown paper with no return name. Just a note tucked into the tape. Every fall deserves a finish. Inside was a custom leather riding jacket. On the back, stitched in clean white thread, was a single word. Torres. Mike didn't need to ask who sent it. He just ran his hand across the stitching and whispered, "Looks like I'm still in the credits after all." Later that night, Mike made a fresh pot of coffee and sat at his desk. He looked up at the photo one more time. The quote beneath it didn't just speak to him anymore. It had become the core of how he lived. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a second copy of the photo and flipped it over. On the back, he wrote a single line. "To the one who reminded me I was never just the fall." He slid it into an envelope and sealed it. No address, no stamp. He would hand it off next time they met. No words needed. Outside, the waves kept rolling. The wind passed gently through the trees. And in a small house not far from the ocean, a man once forgotten by an industry now stood taller than ever. He wasn't chasing the past. He was walking forward with it, frame by frame, fall by fall, friend by friend. The sound of work boots on concrete echoed softly as Mike walked onto the soundstage. The air inside was cool and still smelled faintly of sawdust, freshly painted set walls, and the electric buzz of film lights warming up. But this time, the space didn't feel intimidating. It didn't feel distant. It felt familiar. Crew members nodded as he passed. Some recognized him, others didn't. But they could feel something in his presence, a quiet steadiness that didn't ask for attention, but drew respect anyway. He wore no headset, carried no clipboard. He didn't bark orders or recite credits. He just walked in, greeted the team, and started watching the stunt rehearsal. It was a rooftop chase sequence again. 2 actors, 2 wire rigs, and a timed camera movement that needed to be precise. Mike stood at the edge of the mat, arms crossed, chin tucked low in thought. After a beat, he called out, "Run that second step again. You're jumping too far. Cut the stride by a foot." The performer nodded and tried it again. Clean, safe, believable. Mike gave a single nod, nothing more. But the coordinator nearby turned and said, "That adjustment just saved us half a day." Mike didn't react. He was already on to the next detail. When the day wrapped, the director approached him. "We're lucky to have you on this," he said. Mike shook his head. "No luck, just a lot of getting back up." The director smiled. "Whatever it is, it works." Mike packed up slowly that evening, not in a rush. The team filtered out one by one, offering handshakes, fist bumps, quiet thanks. He paused before leaving, looking back once at the empty soundstage. He didn't need the lights anymore, just the work. Outside, the sky was soft with the orange streaks of dusk. The crew lot was quiet. Then came the rumble of a familiar engine. Keanu pulled up on a black and chrome motorcycle, helmet tucked under his arm. "You ready?" Mike laughed. "You sure your knees can handle the ride?" "Only one way to find out." Mike walked over to the second bike, his own, newly tuned and waiting. The Triumph. Fully rebuilt, painted black with a silver trim. Clean, balanced, alive again. They strapped on helmets. No camera. No crew. No expectation. Just motion. The engines roared to life, and for a moment, the world quieted around them. They eased out of the lot and headed south, hugging the curve of the Pacific Coast Highway. The sky was painted in the soft pastels of early evening, the kind of light that made everything feel suspended in time. Wind slipped past their shoulders, steady and cool. The ocean stretched endlessly to their right, waves curling under the fading sun. It wasn't a race. It wasn't for thrill. It was rhythm, breath, movement without pressure. They rode in silence for miles, the road giving way to stretches of open land, the hum of the tires becoming its own kind of meditation. At a lookout point above the cliffs, Keanu slowed and pulled over. Mike followed. They cut the engines. Only the sounds of gulls and wind remained. Keanu dismounted and leaned against the guardrail, pulling off his helmet. Mike did the same, stretching his back slightly and glancing toward the horizon. They didn't speak right away. They didn't have to. The stillness between them said more than words. After a while, Mike broke the silence. "I thought I was done." Keanu turned to him. "You weren't done, you were just in the middle." Mike let that sit for a second, then nodded. "That middle felt long. Some middles are." They stood together, watching the coastline fade into shadow as the last edge of sunlight dipped below the sea. Mike took a deep breath. "I spent so long thinking I was only what I used to be. Stuntman, fall guy, crash test hero." He looked at his hands, still strong but lined now with time and work. "But now I think I was always something more. I just needed someone to remind me." Keanu looked back out to the ocean. "You reminded me too." Mike glanced at him, surprised. "Yeah? Of what?" Keanu smiled softly. "That the people who catch you, they're the real stars." They both laughed, quiet and easy. Not the laugh of reunion, the laugh of release. A few minutes later, they mounted their bikes again. As they pulled back onto the road, the sky turned deeper blue. The stars were beginning to show, one by one. There was no plan, no destination. Just forward. And for the first time in a long time, Mike wasn't chasing something behind him. He was riding toward what came next. Whatever that was, he was ready. Because the road, just like the man, still had miles left to give. They rode in silence for another hour, the road curving like memory itself, familiar, winding, open. The stars were fully out now, scattered across a velvet sky. The headlights of their bikes lit the pavement in long, golden ribbons as they leaned into the rhythm of the ride. Every turn felt smooth, every breath earned. When they finally pulled off at a quiet stretch overlooking the sea, the only sound was the tick of cooling engines and the hush of waves below. Mike parked, pulled off his helmet, and looked toward the horizon. No stunt could match this. No rig, no wire, no calculated drop. Just gravity, grace, gratitude. Keanu joined him a moment later. No phones, no words, just presence. They sat down in the grass, backs against a rock, letting the night hold them without urgency. Mike looked over, his voice low but steady. "I used to think the fall was the end of everything." Keanu didn't look away from the water. "And now?" Mike smiled. "Now I know the fall just clears the noise. What matters is how you stand back up." Keanu nodded. "And who's standing with you?" They didn't hug, didn't shake hands. They just breathed in the same salt air. Old wounds quiet now. No cameras, no spotlight. Just two men who had seen the bottom and still chose to rise. Somewhere along the highway, the road waited. But not to be conquered, just to be appreciated. Mike closed his eyes for a moment and whispered one last thing. "Full circle." Keanu simply replied, "Ride on." And they would, because this wasn't a comeback. This was a continuation. In the industry, names fade fast, faces even faster. Stunt performers especially, men and women who bleed for the shot, who vanish behind masks, whose bodies take the hit while someone else's gets the credit, rarely stay in memory. They are motion without recognition, sacrifice without ceremony. But not this time. Not for Mike Torres. Because one man remembered. Not just the stunts, not just the fire or the falls or the moments caught on film. He remembered the man. Keanu never made a press release, never posted a tribute or gave an interview. He didn't need applause for what he did. In fact, that would have cheapened it. Because what he gave wasn't charity. It was something far rarer. Loyalty. Real, quiet, steadfast loyalty. The kind you don't ask for and can't buy. The kind that shows up when no one else does. The kind that says, I saw you once, and I still do. In a world that so easily forgets, Keanu chose to remember. When he saw the man in the car, tucked under a blanket of anonymity, of pain, of time, he didn't turn away. He could have. No one would have blamed him. But he stopped. He looked closer, and he chose presence over pity. That choice didn't just change Mike's life. It revived his legacy. Mike never called it a comeback. He hated that word. This wasn't about reclaiming fame. It was about reclaiming identity, about returning to something deeper than a job, about realizing that legacy isn't built in applause, it's built in quiet moments of integrity. One shared cup of coffee, one notebook full of lessons, one day on set that didn't feel like yesterday, but like a brand new beginning. People on those sets didn't just learn how to fall, they learned how to rise, how to carry themselves with humility, how to ask for help without shame, and how to become part of something bigger than themselves. Mike taught all of that, not from a stage, not from a spotlight, but from presence. And that presence stayed in handshakes, in call sheets, in the back of someone's notebook next to a note that read, "Bell, fix me, he just reminded me I still had something to give." One day, a young director stood on a film lot and told his crew, "Let's shoot it the Torres way." And everyone knew what he meant. Not about danger, about discipline. Not about flash, about respect. That's what legacy looks like when it doesn't ask to be remembered, but is anyway. Mike never saw himself as a symbol. He was a man who fell for a living. He hit pavement, glass, water, fire. He let his body absorb the chaos so stories could be told. But what he didn't know, until recently, was that someone had been watching even when the cameras stopped, and that someone had never stopped seeing him. One afternoon, Mike stood in front of a class of first-year stunt trainees. He wore a plain shirt, jeans, and a small brace on his right knee, left over from a fall 20 years earlier. He didn't speak about pain. He spoke about discipline, about preparation, about staying human in a world that asks you to disappear behind explosions and edits. Then he said something that made the room go still. The truth is, this job won't remember you. It's up to you to remember yourself every day in the way you show up, the way you care, the way you treat people who think you're just background. A young trainee raised his hand and asked, "What if we burn out?" Mike looked at him with a smile that came from knowing. Then you find someone who sees the fire still inside you and let them help you light it again. That night, he wrote in his notebook, "What Keanu gave me wasn't a second chance. He gave me a mirror I wasn't afraid to look into." He closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer beside his bed. On the wall above his desk, the framed photo stayed exactly where it belonged. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the fall is never the full story. A few weeks later, Keanu returned from another shoot. He came by the garage just as he always did. No announcement, no reason. They stood side by side, watching two younger stuntmen rehearse a vault over stacked boxes in the driveway. One landed clean, the other didn't. Mike called out, "Reset the ramp angle." Keanu nodded. Too much spring. The two men watched in silence for a while. Then Keanu turned and said, "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Mike gave it a beat, then replied, "All the time. But I don't need a different story," he added. "I just needed a true one." Keanu smiled. "And now?" Mike looked at the two trainees. laughing, stretching, preparing to try again. Now, I'm part of someone else's. They didn't shake hands, didn't pose for a picture. They just walked into the garage together, where another project waited. Not a movie. Not a mission, just a bike. And a bond. And the kind of loyalty the world doesn't write headlines about, but remembers, quietly, always. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voices, it's the quiet ones who carry the most weight. Mike's story reminds us that no life is too far gone, no fall too deep, and no person too forgotten to rise again. All it takes is one person to notice, one hand to reach out, one act of presence to rewrite a legacy. Keanu didn't save Mike with money or fame. He saved him by showing up, by remembering, by seeing him when no one else did. And in doing that, he didn't just restore a man, he restored a brotherhood, a purpose, a name worth remembering. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life who gave their all and never asked for thanks, please like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone like Mike is still waiting for a reason to believe in themselves again. Let's make sure they find it. Let's honor the ones who fall so others can rise. Let's celebrate the ones behind the scenes, the forgotten heroes, because their stories matter just as much as any headline ever will.